Hello and thank you for watching. Today I'm going to talk about pet mice, normally referred to as fancy mice, and that's for a good reason. They are visibly, behaviourally and genetically different from wild mice. To think about this topic more in depth, I'll be talking about taxonomy, speciation and domestication. So let's start with the basics. How do we name a species? Well, we name species based on their relation to other species, and this helps us consider how animals have evolved and diversitised over time. This method of naming or ordering is known as taxonomy. In taxonomy, there are larger groups which are broken down into smaller groups based on those shared characteristics. These groups or categories are known as kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, then species. And this can be remembered by the mnemonic kings play chess on fine green silk. So when discussing an animal's species scientifically, we use the binomial naming convention, and that is to write the animal's genus and species as its full name. For humans, we are in the genus Homo and the species sapien, so we are known as Homo sapiens. Wolves are Canus lupus. However, dogs are a subspecies of wolves, so we therefore call them Canus lupus familiaris. Subspecies are groups of a species that have become isolated and therefore may show differences either in behaviour or morphology. However, these differences are not as apparent as with separate species, and importantly, subspecies can interbreed without any loss of fitness. By that, I mean that when subspecies interbreed, there's no loss in that new animal's ability to fill the niches of one or both of its parent species. For mice, they belong to the kingdom Animal, the phylum Chordate and Class Mammalia, and the Order Rodentia. This simply means that mice are animals. They are chordates, meaning that they have a spine. They are mammalian, meaning that they produce body heat and milk for their young. And they are rodents, which describes all animals with continuously growing incisor teeth. The common term mouse is used to identify any small rodents with the characteristics of large ears and long, often hairless tails. However, there are a number of species that fit into that classification, belonging to the classes and orders described above. So mice, but also rats, hamsters, gerbils, and the list goes on. It is only when we consider the family and subfamily, the genus, species, and even subspecies of a certain animal that we begin to be able to describe their specific features. Mice are in the family Muridae. However, this is a large grouping of all mice and rat-like animals. This family is broken into subfamilies. The two largest are Murinae, or Old World, and Sigmodontae, or New World. These subfamilies, of which there are many more, help to distinguish species based on their natural occurrence in Europe and Africa, the Old World, or the Western Hemisphere, the New World. The most common mouse that is considered invasive in most of the world is thought to have originated in Asia. As such, it is an Old World, so belonging to the family Muridae and subfamily Murin. We now move into the genus Mus. It is the genus that separates out other Old World rodents, like rats and shrews, from mice. However, there are still a number of different species within the genus Mus. The most common species for mice in the genus Mus is musculus, or house mouse. Having spread throughout Europe and later the Americas, they occur in diverse geographical locations and therefore experience differences in habitat. This diversity encourages the development of different traits, and it is therefore unsurprising that there are many subspecies of Mus musculus. The first recording of keeping these animals as pets originates in China as far back as 11,000 BC. Keeping mice as pets became more popular in Europe around the 17th century, and this long period of selective breeding has led to the divergence of pet mice or fancy mice from those of the wild or house mouse. Therefore, fancy mice are considered a unique subspecies, and the scientific name for the wild mice is Mus musculus, but for fancy mice it is Mus musculus domesticus. This naming culture demonstrates how wild type mice are closely related but are fundamentally different to pet or fancy mice. But what does domesticus mean? Well, it's Latin for domesticated, but what do we mean when we say that a species is domesticated? The most common domestic animals that come to mind are things like dogs and cows and horses, all of which are animals that do have a wild ancestor, but that have been chosen by humans to serve a purpose, whether that be to work for us or to provide us with food or milk. In modern times, it can be argued that this list can be expanded to animals that provide us with some form of companionship. So this raises the question, can any animal be domesticated? Well, the simple answer is no, not really. The animals discussed above not only provide us with something, but they are also safe. There are rare instances where a dog may bite a person, but I for one would trust a dog more than I would a wolf. And for good reason. The dog is domesticated. They have through countless generations been taught not to fear people, and that people aren't prey either. A wolf can be tamed so as not to be fearful, and generally they don't view humans as prey. However, this means that that individual animal is tame, but the species as a whole would be unchanged. Domestication happens to a species, while taming happens to an individual. To domesticate a species, we breed the most tame individuals that we have available together again and again and again. In doing so, we make physiological changes. In studies done on foxes, for example, it's been noticed that when attempting a domestication study, the foxes became more friendly and curious as expected, and that it was found that this behaviour was modulated by adrenaline production. And the suggestion is that as we breed tame animals, these animals that naturally have lower adrenaline levels pass on this tendency to their offspring, and so their offspring in turn have lower adrenaline levels and are so less fearful. And again, when this is done repeatedly, this leads to the behaviours associated with domestication. Interestingly, there were other side effects, such as changes in fur colour, which tends to become lighter and more mottled or pie-coloured, and droopy or floppy ears and tails. And that's a trait that is rarely seen when you consider wild animals, but is relatively common in domestic species. If we think of a classic cow with black and white blotches, that's very different to something like a water buffalo, which is all of one colour. It should also be noted that almost all domestic species form a natural social group. So wolves form packs, cattle and sheep form herds, and so on. It's thought that it's this social behaviour that makes domestication possible. Social animals are likely to have a greater repertoire of behaviour. Things in their environment aren't just a predator or prey or a breeding opportunity. Social animals can also have relationships in a much wider range. For example, a friend, but one that is more dominant, so they need to be submissive, or a more submissive friend, so they can be more dominant. A dangerous and therefore aggressive stranger, or a submissive, attractive stranger. And this larger repertoire means that humans can also form a meaningful relationship as part of that animal's social world. This may start off as a stranger and therefore fearful and untrusting relationship, but as that trust is formed, we move into something more similar to that friend category. In a solitary species, we can build trust, absolutely, but there's no natural place for us to serve in that animal's life. If we're raising a solitary animal from a baby, we may start off with something akin to a parent-like role, but as that animal matures, it would normally leave its parent, and the only thing it would have contact with would be a breeding partner. But even then, that would only be for a short amount of time. The only long-term relationships a solitary animal would form is with offspring. But again, even that would only be for the period of time that they're raising them. There's no long-term place for us in a solitary animal's social world. With mice being social, it means that we can begin to form a meaningful part of their social world. Mice will form groups and a hierarchy within those groups, often with males being the dominant figure, with a harem of females, and those females will then have dominant and more submissive members. If we can get a mouse to trust us, it will begin to view us as one of those other members of its social world. Thank you for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed this video. I've covered taxonomy, speciation and domestication. Let me know if you've enjoyed this video by hitting the like button, and thank you for watching.